If you have children, you know that they do not consider that their parents had lives before them. You can tell them all about what you did before they were born, and it just doesn't click. I think we treat history the same way. We, as regular, non historian citizens, do not often think about how history can affect the present day, especially when whatever is happening is geographically far away from us, like Iran. What do most Americans think about Iran? Scary place, Western culture hating place, the country we don't want to have nuclear bombs, funders of terrorism. This might all be true, but I also believe that the Middle East is a complicated and a magical place. We cannot talk about why we attacked Iran in 2026 without talking about Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. Pahlavi ruled from 1941 to 1979, and he was known as a monarch who rapidly modernized and boosted Iran's economy. He was also known for becoming quite the authoritarian, especially in the later years in his reign. He was the impetus for the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, and his relationship with the United States led to the Iranian hostage crisis of 1978. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's father, Reza Shah, believed that the future of Iran depended greatly on the modernization of Iran. So Pahlavi was educated with this in mind. He was fluent in French by the time he entered boarding school in Switzerland at age 11. This was the language spoken by most elites and indicated his father's insistence that Iran be able to mingle with the European aristocrats. The key to his education at the Elite Institut de la Rose is that he was among the rulers of the children of Europe. He learned about European politics, international diplomacy, and was immersed in Western culture. He later attended the Iranian Military Academy, learning military leadership, strategy, and officer training. During World War II, Pahlavi's father was accused of sympathizing with Germany. So when Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran in 1941, they forced him to resign and placed 17-year-old Reza Pahlavi in charge. This is important, especially because his reign was always associated with foreign powers influencing Iranian politics. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a modernizing monarch. He wanted to turn Iran into a powerful, modern state that rivaled Western countries. And he was successful in modernizing Iran, but not everyone wanted that. And not everyone liked how he did it. It's a bitch being in charge, isn't it? The Shah made many modern improvements, one being land reform, especially from 1960 to 1963. Before this, Iran's land was owned by large, wealthy feudal estates owned by the elites and the religious foundations. This is key. The Shah instead redistributed the land to peasants and tenant farmers, though some argued that the land was split up into land that was too small or too untenable to farm. So he wasn't really helping the farmers. And this led to many of the farmers moving to Tehran and moving into urban slums, which led to the slums getting really big. The land redistribution might seem like a misguided yet maybe altruistic move, but really it was designed to weaken the aristocracy so they didn't have as much influence over his rule. And this move was influenced by the West, as it was largely believed that if people were landowners, they were less likely to start a communist revolution. Remember, this is right during the Cold War, and communism was bad. One of the most important changes with this reform is that it will lead to the Iranian Revolution, is that the clerics lost both land and influence. A lot of the land was owned through charitable endowments to religious institutions. So when the land was redistributed, clerics lost a lot of economic power. One cleric in particular, Ruhollah Khomeini, lost influence and became a vocal and persistent opponent of what was called the White Revolution and Reza's reign. The Shah made a lot of other economic reforms that helped modernize and westernize Iran. He invested heavily into Iran's infrastructure and industrial growth during the 1960s and 1970s. New highways, expansion of oil, rail, airports, major dam and irrigation systems, rapid industrialization. He expanded women's rights, which really ticked off Muslim conservatives, and he gave them the right to vote in 1963. And he improved education generally for everyone within the country. And of course, what fueled all of these reforms? An oil boom. It is not a secret that Iran has enormous oil reserves. What the Shah did was expand how the country extracted and exported the oil, which led to immense economic growth. As industry grew worldwide during the 1960s and 70s, demand for oil also went up. This is going to be a very massive oversimplification of what happened during this time with global oil and Iran. But essentially, the oil-producing countries banded together to form OPEC, which took power and control away from the West, which they called the Seven Sisters, so they could set prices, production levels, and profits for oil. Iran went from making about $3.6 billion in 1972 to $21 billion in 1974. Oil accounted for about 79% of Iran's governmental revenue. Aside from investment into the country's infrastructure, the Shah also invested in industry, and that included steel plants, petrochemical factories, automobile manufacturing, and construction. This also led to massive investment into Iran's military, especially in advanced fighter jets, tanks, and missile systems. 2026 Americans might be horrified that Iran began building up their defense during this time, but the United States not only supported this, but encouraged and enabled it. The U.S. wasn't at odds with Iran. It was at odds at Russia. And because this was the Cold War, Iran was a strategic partner during the Cold War, given its proximity to Russia. This was part of President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger's doctrine in the Middle East that focused on Iran and Saudi Arabia. The idea was that the US would support allied nations with weapons and training so that these allies would handle regional security themselves without the US having to get too involved. Shah was able to buy arms from the United States with very few restrictions, including F-14 Tomcat jets, F-4 Phantoms, advanced radar and missile systems, tanks, armored vehicles, Navy ships, and helicopters. Between 1964 and 1978, Iran's economy grew about 13% annually. This was one of the fastest growth rates in the world. This all sounds great, right? Yahoo for the Shah. Unfortunately, the massive economic growth, along with the oil boom, created substantial problems. There was massive inflation, shortage on homes in urban areas, and the rural areas and poor communities just didn't really see the benefits of all of this. The people at the top, benefited greatly, especially the Shah and, of course, the government elites. The Shah came to power when he was 17 in 1941, and he definitely did a lot to modernize Iran. By the 1970s, though, he became very unpopular with many Iranians. Maybe the power and the money went to his head, but he became an oppressive authoritarian. He had an intelligence service, SAVAK, who monitored and suppressed political opposition. Suppression included imprisoning and even torturing political dissidents. There was a long list of groups that opposed the Shah, including clerics and conservative Muslims. They believed that the modernization in Iran was undermining Iranian culture and values. They did not like that the West had so much influence, especially with women's rights and the more secular education being offered throughout the country. This would be like the United States evangelical fundamentalist Christians not liking more open-mindedness in the fabric of American society and electing a president that they thought supported their values, or at least electing a president they thought they could control to get those values instilled. The Shah's most vocal and vociferous critic was Ruhollah Khomeini. More on him in the next episode. The Bazaris, or bazaar merchants, also opposed the Shah because his modernization, especially with the introduction of more industry, threatened their more traditional businesses. The Bazaris were influential not only for their money, but because marketplaces were the gathering places and the places to trade information. Rural farmers, of course, didn't like the Shah because most of their farms were too small to be profitable, and they had to move to the urban slums to have a chance. While rural communities embraced the reform initially, it didn't really pan out for them, and they resented it. Political liberals and intellectuals, such as journalists, professors, students, and lawyers, opposed the Shah because they thought he was too aligned with the West and did not believe in the extreme capitalism happening in Iran at the time. And of course, they also were against his going against all the political opposition. Your regular average Joe, lower and middle class Iranians did not feel that they benefited from Iran's success, and instead, only those close to the government became wealthy. We can relate to that as Americans, can't we? The Shah believed he was building a modern superpower in the Middle East. But while he was building highways, factories, and one of the most powerful militaries in the region, a revolution was quietly building against him. The leader of that revolution wasn't a general or a politician. He was a cleric who had been exiled from the country years earlier, a man who believed that Iran should be ruled not by a king, but by Islamic law. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about how this exiled cleric returned to Iran and led one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century, a revolution that still shapes the conflict between Iran and the United States today.